Most people ask where I got my rifle shooting knowledge. Most of you out there probably think it was from my father or my grandfather. A lot of you out there probably think it was from the training that I've had over the years with some fantastic instructors. But actually, much of my hard-earned wisdom came from shooting an old M1 Garand in service rifle matches back in the day. As a young man in the 1990s, I was definitely the youngest guy out there shooting a Garand, and I was usually shooting against guys that were more than twice my age. A gunsmith that I used to work for helped me put together my first Garand, and it's an excellent rifle. And of course, I also had the youngest set of eyes on the line. So I had all the advantages, but I struggled really bad when I started. Finally, an old man named Gus showed me what I was doing wrong. Through all three shooting positions in the rifle matches, my point of impact was changing. This little lesson would forever change how I approach the art of shooting. A point of impact shift is a deviation in the bullet's impact point in relation to your aiming point. Basically, when you zero your rifle and everything is perfect, then the group starts to go somewhere else. You're experiencing a point of impact shift. Point of impact shifts happen for many reasons. Loose screws in your action or anywhere else on your gun, barrel contact with the stock, the condition of your barrel, muzzle devices, ammunition variances, slings, rests, and even a bad scope can cause point of impact shift. Normally, this happens when you zero your rifle a certain way, then shoot that same rifle differently or with a new variable added. Most people don't even know that they're having point of impact shifts because they only shoot at targets from one position while they practice. So for the remainder of this video, I'll discuss things that cause point of impact shifts and offer you some solutions for dealing with them. But I warn you, some of this content is going to go against conventional wisdom. So now we're going to get into things that cause point of impact shifts. And I'm going to start off with slings because that's what was causing point of impact shifts with the Garand I told you about at the beginning of this video. I always zeroed my Garand on sandbags. Then I would shoot prone and sitting using sling tension, and I shot standing without a sling at all. Sling tension was actually moving my point of impact 8 MOA when I used the sling from a prone position compared to my bench rest zero. Gus showed me how he zeroed his Garand, and what he did was he zeroed his rifle in the prone position using sling tension. Then he would make slight sight adjustments for the other positions. He also marked his sling for different adjustments in every different shooting position. And after that, my Garand never touched a sandbag again. This little lesson would actually mold the way that I viewed slings for the rest of my life. I trained at Front Sight when Jeff Cooper was still there, and everyone was using sling tension while shooting. I noticed that even the instructors at Front Sight didn't shoot very well offhand while using sling tension, and I instantly knew why. It's because they zeroed their rifle on a bench. Factory rifles are the absolute worst when it comes to point of impact shifts while using sling tension. My first Tikka would have 5 MOA shifts if I used sling tension while I was shooting. Even a rifle that's been properly bedded or one sitting in a free-floated chassis can experience point of impact shifts, but those just won't be as dramatic. People tend to zero their rifles on a bench, then think point of impact is the same when they use sling tension, but it isn't. The problem is that after they zero their rifle on a bench, they never shoot groups from actual field positions again. If you insist on using sling tension to shoot, you need to test that on targets to verify point of impact shifts. When hunters started figuring this out, the shooting sling was slowly abandoned because hunters really wanted the flexibility to be able to shoot from many different positions without changing point of impact. Look at today's best shooters from the standing position. Olympians, biathlon shooters, PRS, and high power. None of them use a sling for stabilization while standing anymore. My advice is to actually test how your rifle reacts when you use sling tension before you fully commit to using that technique. It may or may not be right for you. If you've been around rifles for long enough, you know that when you have a wandering zero, usually something is loose somewhere in your system. It could be the action screws, the scope bases, or the scope rings. If something in the system moves just a little bit, your point of impact will shift. If I were at the range and I asked 20 random shooters what the torque specs were on their action screws, maybe 4 or 5 of them could give me the correct answer. If I asked those 20 shooters if they used a torque wrench on their ring screws, you'd be lucky if maybe one of them did. Torquing everything down is literally the easiest thing you can do to prevent point of impact shifts. Most people just don't do it, and I don't know why, but one could claim that this mentality is the reason why the vast majority of shooters suck. Always take the time to properly set up a rifle. Being too lazy to torque a few screws will have you wasting ammo trying to fix an easy problem. When a rifle barrel makes contact with the stock, it changes that barrel's harmonics and will usually change the point of impact. A barrel that isn't free-floated is the worst in this regard, but a free-floated barrel can also suffer from point of impact shifts. If a stock is torqued or flexed, it can make contact with the barrel and change point of impact. So the more flexible a stock is, the more prone it is to point of impact shifts from shooting off of different rests or using different sling tension. You know, those cheap injection molded plastic stocks are the absolute worst in this regard. You could free float these things as much as you want, but there's just so much give and flex in them that you'll never achieve the desired results if you're after accuracy and precision. Environmental conditions can also change the way that a barrel sits inside the stock. Stock material can expand and heat and change pressure points on the barrel, which can cause point of impact shifts. Moisture can also cause a wood stock that isn't properly sealed to expand, and that could also change point of impact. So it's always best to do what you can to prevent the barrel from touching the stock, regardless of what shooting position you end up in. This usually requires the rifle to be bedded and free-floated into a rigid aftermarket stock, or you could buy an aluminum chassis or do both. A muzzle device is anything added to the end of your barrel. They could be flash suppressors, muzzle brakes, sound suppressors, or even tuners. Adding a muzzle device to your barrel will usually change your point of impact. This point of impact change isn't necessarily because the muzzle device is somehow altering the bullet's trajectory or velocity. The point of impact shift is usually from the weight and length that you add to the barrel. Basically, you're usually altering barrel harmonics when you add a muzzle device. This makes it very important to re-zero your rifle if you add a muzzle device to it. Generally, the lighter and thinner a barrel is, the more point of impact shift you'll experience with a muzzle device. in the firearms world, we have two different types of recoil. We have primary and secondary recoil. Secondary recoil is the recoil that we experience after the bullet has exited the barrel. Primary recoil occurs while the bullet is still in the barrel. Primary recoil movement can cause major point of impact shifts depending on the rifle. Primary recoil is the reason why a perfectly free-floated barrel will have point of impact shifts between using a bipod and using a front rest. Most hunting rifles with most hunting cartridges will move, a certain distance while the bullet is still in the barrel. And remember, a muzzle brake does not stop primary recoil. During primary recoil, a bipod might cause the barrel to jump upwards on you. When you shoot off of a bench rest, your primary recoil might cause the rifle to go perfectly backwards on you. When you shoot off a hunting backpack full of gear out in the mountains, your rifle might shift to the left or the right during primary recoil. So, a lot depends on this, especially when using a bipod. Do you load your bipod or not? What kind of feet are on your bipod? What kind of surface is your bipod on? All of this matters. Even this PRS rig right here with this nice Bartlein barrel on it and this absolutely fantastic chassis system will experience a slight point of impact shift between when I shoot off of a bipod or when I shoot off of a barrier. But fortunately, this system mitigates that enough to where it's not really that drastic for a PRS shooting environment. But back to primary recoil movement, every single external contact point on the rifle will have some effect on primary recoil movement. And this includes contact with the shooter, using a sling for tension, or using any type of bipod or rest. Primary recoil dynamics is something that was really never understood until we had the widespread use of high-speed cameras. In fact, some rifle shooting legends of the past claim that the rifle didn't move at all before the bullet exited, but we now know that that was a false assumption. There's very little that a shooter can do to stop primary recoil other than shooting a heavier rifle or a lighter cartridge or a combination of both. The way you control primary recoil is with consistency and eliminating variables. Something as simple as a front sling stud hitting the bag on your front rest can throw your point of impact off. For a hunter, we usually don't care if the effects of primary recoil are minimal between shooting positions, but what if that point of impact shift is 5 MOA? Then it's a real issue. The only way to know is to test your equipment in actual field conditions, and that's exactly what you should be doing. It's 2024, and I don't know why people still think that ammunition will always shoot to the same point of aim, point of impact. A perfectly hand-loaded batch of cartridges where everything came from the exact same lot and was stored in a controlled environment can still have ammo-related point of impact shifts. Temperature, humidity, elevation, and wind will change velocity and trajectory, which ultimately changes point of impact. This is why it's important to test your ammo out in the conditions that you plan to shoot it in. Also, factory ammunition will vary wildly from lot to lot. And anybody who's shot for a long time understands this. It's not uncommon for commercial ammo manufacturers to completely change the powder that they use for the exact same type of ammo. I mean, Hornady is famous for this. I don't know if you remember when the 6.5 Creedmoor came out, And Hornady put out probably some of the most accurate, precise factory ammunition ever made is their match ammo with the 140 grain AMAX. And they even put load data on this. They used exactly 42 grains of H4350. Well, all of a sudden, people were winning matches with this stuff. And then all of a sudden, SDs went all over the place. Grips got bad. It got crappy, and no one could understand why. And it turned out Hornady completely dumped H4350 and saved money by going to some other powder. And of course, you all know the recent incident from Hornady where they did the exact same thing with 7mm PRC ammunition. So never buy or make ammo and take it hunting without testing it out first. Then make sure you verify your zero again when you get to your hunting destination and compensate for environmental factors. If you watched my videos during Scope Month last December, you were probably surprised and terrified by how fragile lightweight hunting scopes are these days. A damaged scope will definitely result in both wandering zero and point of impact issues. Many people will spend a fortune on ammo and hours of valuable time trying out different ammunition, changing rings and bases, and bedding their stock, only to realize that their scope was bad the entire time. If I experience a wandering zero issue, the first thing I do is retorque all the screws on my rifle. If that doesn't work, I'll pull the scope off, install a known good second scope, and test the rifle with that. If the wandering zero problem goes away, well, the scope was the issue the whole time. So I'll also probably do a turret tracking test with that scope before I pull it. But if the problem persists, the scope was fine and you can move on and troubleshoot other things. So scope issues are actually really easy to troubleshoot. I have a video on my channel called Troubleshooting Scope Issues that I posted during Scope Month last December, and I highly recommend that you watch that video. Sometimes a point of impact shift really isn't happening at all. It's just poor technique on the shooter's part. This is especially noticeable on the first shot of the day before you actually settle into your rifle. If I'm shooting for groups, I do a lot of dry fire runs before I fire an actual shot. Go through your whole process of checking for parallax, making sure the scope is level, breathing, and trigger control. In particular, make sure that there's no movement in your scope reticle as the trigger breaks. Many shooters blame a cold barrel for impact shifts on their first shot when it's actually just poor shooting technique when they take their first shot of the day. Shooting good, consistent groups requires a consistent and repeatable technique. And, I'm not going to show you how to achieve natural point of aim or how to put pressure on a rifle. I'm just going to tell you that you need to do it the same way every time. Don't slack on that first shot of the day. We hear the terms cold bore and clean bore a great deal in the shooting community. A freshly cleaned bore with no fouling in it will have a different point of impact than the same barrel when it's fouled. How many shots it takes to stabilize the point of impact from a clean bore to a fouled bore will vary between barrels. I have barrels that will return to point of aim, point of impact after one fouling shot. And, other barrels where it might take 5 or 6 shots for the point of impact to stabilize. This is why hunters always hunt with a slightly fouled bore. And why most hunters don't clean their barrel at all during hunting season. Also, A clean bore and chamber will usually have a little bit of residual oil in it, which will probably increase pressure and velocity and change point of impact. Just to give you an example here, this was shot out of a very accurate rifle that I have, and this is actually a 6-shot group from a totally cleaned bore. All the fouling was removed, it was scrubbed, and you could see with this particular Brux barrel, the first shot, you could see the point of impact was off, and then the remaining 5 shots basically went into this down here into the same hole. So even with a precision custom cut rifled hand lapped barrel, you'll get a little bit of a point of impact shift with a totally clean bore. And now I want to talk about one of the most confusing variables of point of impact shift, and that's barrel temperature. People who only shoot match quality bull barrels usually think cold bore point of impact shifts are a myth. But trust my lifetime of shooting experience when I tell you that cold bore point of impact shifts are a reality with some barrels. They're not a myth. If you've ever spent a lot of time doing load development with factory lightweight hunting rifles chambered in hot cartridges, you know that as that long pencil barrel heats up, your point of impact often changes. Also, many rimfire cartridges like the 22 long rifle almost always have cold bore point of impact shifts. Barrel quality also affects point of impact shifts. Most hammer forged barrels have stress points in the steel, which can cause a barrel to expand in unpredictable ways when it gets really hot. Button rifled barrels that also aren't properly stress relieved can also suffer from point of impact shifts due to heat. The quality of the steel used to make a barrel is also very important, and top tier steel will be stress relieved before it even becomes a barrel. Many factory barrels have point of impact shifts when the barrel gets hot due to cost control measures in manufacturing when it comes to mass producing those barrels. But most cut rifled barrels and properly stress relieved button barrels from the best barrel makers won't experience cold bore point of impact shifts to any measurable degree. The important thing here, though, is to know exactly how your rifle behaves when it starts heating up. I made this video because I get questions almost every month from viewers experiencing point of impact shifts. And this video will be a quick resource that I can send them to so they can troubleshoot the point of impact issues that they're having. There's nothing worse than having a rifle and a load that were just perfectly dialed in, and then they let you down when it matters the most. Whether you have a cheap factory rifle or a custom rig with a Bartlett barrel, you need to know exactly where your point of impact is in actual field conditions. Also, it's important to realize that point of impact shifts are normal responses to environmental, mechanical, and technique changes that can often be avoided. You know, when you're hiking up an elevation chasing elk, or tall grass prevents you from going prone and using your bipod while you're hunting pronghorn, you need to be able to adapt. And in order to do that, you need to know where your point of impact is using different rests and shooting it from different positions. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video about point of impact shifts. Thank you for watching, and as always, good hunting.